I'm cool with that.
All right. So let's just go with the first question. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Obsidian. You've alluded to this before, but you can expound upon it. In your opinion, are Black people in America Westerners?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we are.
No, pretty simple. Do you care to expound, or just yes, it is what it is? You're Westerners.
Yeah. I mean, we're here in the West. We grew up in the West. This is the only thing that we really know, and we're really blessed to be here in the West. We enjoy a lifestyle that is the
The only
envy of the
thing that we
world, and we are raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I say that as somebody who is neither a Jew nor a Christian, I
Mhm.
might add, but the Judeo-Christian tradition of being, having a foot in Athens and one in Jerusalem has been something that has been the envy of the world. We are the beneficiaries of a tradition of the Enlightenment, the scientific method, human rights, the Magna Carta. All of those all those great things. Of course, the United States Constitution by the founding fathers. It wasn't perfect, obviously. Obviously, we had slavery. Obviously, we had Jim Crow. It's like what Barack Obama said in my hometown when he was making his bid for president, and he did what became known as the race speech here in my hometown of Philly. Me and Omar Wally, we both are homeboys. He rightly said in that speech, and I think both of you will kindly recall, we are working toward a more perfect union.
Mm.
And I think that the African American experience, or the Black American experience, or the Negro American experience, whatever works for you, um, has greatly enriched the American experience. The founding fathers built a house, we made it a home, and yeah, we're the envy of the world.
Mm.
Nobody else that's black heritage has thus far been able to achieve what we've achieved. Like, for example, Africa hasn't produced an Oprah. Africa hasn't produced a Barack Obama. Africa hasn't produced a Jay-Z. Now, that's not to say that that will never happen. This is it's still early on in the 21st century. And some people that are world watchers are saying that that the 21st century will be the century for Africa. I have a good friend that works in Africa as we speak, O'Shea Duke Jackson. So that could very well change. I'm not. That's the other great thing about America is that nothing is permanent. Nothing is fixed and static forever. It can very well change, on a dime the next day. So it really encourages us all to stay on our toes, and be the best that we can be. America has had its problems, no doubt about it. Nobody would deny that. But the great thing about America is that it has an amazing, uncanny ability, number one, to solve problems, and number two, to reinvent itself and invigorate itself. And I think that's the challenge for Americans overall in the 21st century, Black Americans in particular. The challenge is, how do we meet the demands and the challenges of a 21st century? W.E.B. Du Bois, arguably our nation's greatest, foremost scholar, certainly of the first half of the 20th century, no doubt about it, um, famously said and rightly said that the problem for the Negro was that of the color line. He was right about that. He was correct. The 20th century was the biggest problem for the American Negro, as we were known at that time, was indeed the color line. He was right. But the 21st century, we have other problems that we have to deal with. And I think if we marshal our resources and our brain power and so forth, I think we can make a dent in it. But it's an attitudinal thing. Many Black Americans are still holding on to the past, and the past is becoming increasingly irrelevant. 1965 Mississippi burning. I mean, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work in 2021. So yeah, do I think we're Westerners? Absolutely.
All right. No, that's great. So what sounds like you're saying, you not only do you believe in the West, you believe in the ability for, Black Americans in this place to reinvent themselves, because America
Yes.
creates the kind of system where you can do that. You can evolve, you
Yes.
can progress if you put
Yes.
enough brain power to it.
Yes. I mean, where else could Malcolm X have been created? Look at
Mhm.
him, for example. How many times did he reinvent himself? He went from Detroit Red, from Malcolm Little to Detroit Red to Malcolm X to Alhaj Malik Al-Shabazz before he died inside of less than 40 years. How many people can do something like that in other places of the world? Only in the United States could that have happened. And that's the fundamental power of America and what you can do here. You can reinvent yourself. You can be whatever you want to be here. That's the one thing that my father told me before he left this world. We had a discussion only barely a week after my 30th birthday. He had passed away in a hospital, Chestnut Hill Hospital here in Philly. Omen Wiley will know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And on December 8th, 1998, we spent the entire evening into the wee hours of the morning speaking. And right after I left, he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me the reason why he signed up underage for the United States Marine Corps and fought in Korea and did all the other things he did after he got back home at a time when racism was a real thing. I mean, he was from the South. He was from Savannah, Georgia. And he endured a lot of crap off of white folks, or I don't want to use the term because I don't want to get you in trouble. It begins with the C word, as they would call white folks back then, and pejorative. And he said the reason why he did those things and would go on to become a successful contractor, etc., and so forth, is said because I wanted my children to be able to realize in full the American dream. There were these things I won't be able to do in my lifetime, but you and your sisters and your brother will be able to do it. That he told me that before he died, that he wanted us to be able to realize in full what America was all about. So I mean, that those are the words of a dying man. He just happened to be my dad.
Right. All right. Well, Omawale, Africa.
Hey,
are Black people in America Westerners? What do you think?
Absolutely not. They are not.
Absolutely not. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, Chris, I appreciate you hosting us both on your channel tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
You couldn't have chosen two polar opposites, but as my brother Mumia said, we are homeboys from the city of brotherly love. So we're going to try to show and demonstrate a little bit of that love tonight. I mean, of course, I think we're going to disagree on a lot, but I don't think the conversation has to be disagreeable, right? Just two quick points before I answer the question, because I can answer it very quickly. But the first thing is I would love for us to be able to speak to the question that you labeled the discussion. Can Black people prosper as Americans? So maybe before we go to question two, that'll be a good question for us to answer. And then second, I know if we can probably keep our responses within, I don't know if the time is 3 minutes, just so that we can have the time to have the engagement in a proper manner. But to answer the question, no, Black people are not Westerners. The concept of a Westerner has always had European connotations. In fact, it has referred directly to the Western nations, those nations who see their cultural, ideological, and political wellspring coming from Greece and Rome, right? So Black people have never fit within that particular paradigm. In fact, I mean, I think Malcolm X once said it. He said, if you put puppies in the oven, right, does that make them biscuits? Like basically saying, like, if you put a cat into the oven and that cat has kittens, are those kittens biscuits or are they kittens? And if those kittens have cats in that oven, right, are their children kittens or are they biscuits? So the thing is, we still hold much of our cultural form, much of our spiritual form, even being housed here in the West. In fact, the fact that we have held on to that form has been one of the reasons why we have been attacked culturally in the ways that we've been, right? If you refer back to 1890 at the Mohawk Conference that was held by President Rutherford B. Hayes, when they did the gathering at his home, the question is, how do you essentially educate African people in this country to make them more American? Because they were concerned that we had held on to so many of our traditions while in this country, and they saw many of those traditions as a threat. So without giving a full dissertation, I'll say, no, we are not Westerners. We are still African people, although we reside here in the West.
Okay, that makes sense. Mr. Obsidian, what are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, so the idea of blood and soil, the idea that your national identity is tied to tribe, and that in turn is tribe to a nation. We can test out Omawali's thesis right here. Let a non-Japanese, and that includes other Asians, by the way. Let a non-Japanese try and go become a Japanese. See, today in 2021, not 1890. Let another non-Japanese try to become a Japanese. See what happens to them. They won't let you do it. There's a specific word for non-Japanese people in Japan. It's called a gaijin. Go to Mexico City, and try to become a Mexican. See what happened to you. They have it in their constitution that their society is to remain a certain way racially. It's like that in Spain. It's like that in many countries. Okay, and it's not just Northwest European. The United States is unique in that it was not built on the idea of blood and soil, but built on an idea that all men and women were endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that the United States protects those rights and stands up for those rights, protects the rights of the minority. And that promise was fulfilled with the election twice of Barack Hussein Obama Jr., 44th president of the United States and leader of the free world, a black man being elected twice by a largely white populace. Okay? This is not a land of blood and soil. This is a land of ideas. This is a land of merit. This is a land of, like I said, the renewal of whoever you want to be. You can be whatever you want to be here. Doesn't matter what your race is, what your sexual orientation is, where you came from, whether you were poor or not. Doesn't matter. There's societies around this world, including in Africa. If you're poor, you're toast. If you're born poor, you're likely going to remain poor. In Africa, right now. Here in the United States, you can be born poor and end up a multi-billionaire. That's a fact. If anybody knows that, black Americans know it. As for the idea, can we prosper here in the United States? I just got finished telling you, I just came back from washing clothes. I've been self-employed for the last 6 years. I set my own hours. I follow in the footsteps of 3 generations of black businessmen who all also set their own hours. I remember my dad, he would set his own hours. He come home whenever he feel like it and then go back to work. That is the American dream. And to be brutally frank with you, Ms. Charde, I think that black Americans, both black men and black women, because the women in my family were prosperous black business women then and now. But black men in particular, I think if we spent more time working on our entrepreneurial and commerce and business efforts and less on racial grievance, we would get a lot further, in my opinion.
Okay. Omawali Africa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was just very confused by his response or rebuttal. I don't know, like, the point that he was trying to make. I mean, he started off by invoking blood and soil, which threw me off a bit, with that being the slogan of, German Nazis, right? That's the slogan that they invoked to launch their movement.
Right, and that was the point that I was making.
Well, okay. I mean, you said a lot, so I wasn't, it was hard for me to follow the logic and where you were going with it. But let me finish if you don't mind. So the other points he started to raise about, I think he talked about Japan and other nations. The first question that you asked was, are we Westerners? So if he was using those instances to say, to be honest, I don't know what he was trying to say, because I don't think he ever said it. But if we were to use, I guess, similar examples, I mean, if you look at the so-called nation state of Israel, right, or, the practice of Zionism, right, doesn't matter where those people are located around the world, they understand that they are Jews. In fact, the nation of China, if you read their understanding of their philosophy of, like, their one China policy, like, it extends far beyond just Taiwan and China. They consider Chinese nationals, no matter where you are living, to still be very much a part of, like, the Chinese nation, right? So things like nationhood and identity are always aspirational, because they have implications for power, politics, and influence. So I think it all depends on what are you aspiring towards, and what are your objectives as a group. So for me personally, right, if my objectives are those of power, right, and changing the paradigm that our group is currently faced with, then I think that whatever identity um, that I choose to embrace and or adopt has to be one that leads me to that power, right? And the idea of grounding myself in these Judeo-Christian traditions, or the Enlightenment period, or even in some of the dogma and propaganda that he's mentioning about all men being created equal, like the irony of that, right? That these documents and this beautiful language is being developed, right, and spoken at the very moment that your ancestors are enslaved and being dehumanized, right? And he made a very interesting point at the beginning where he said that our founding fathers built the house and we made it a home. Well, that's a very, in my opinion, that's an ethnological statement that is very much in line with that tradition of thinking, right? Ethnologists didn't view African people as humans collectively, but even more important to that, they saw the European race as the patriarchal race and the African race as the feminine race. So when he says that we built the home, that sounds like a very feminine quality. Like, hey, as a man, I built this house and my wife comes in and makes it a home. So he's saying that we as Black people in this country, yeah, the founding fathers built the house, so we made it a home. I think that some of these ideas that are baked into this analysis are very interesting, but the dialogue is good nevertheless.
May I respond?
Sure.
Okay, so Omawali mentions both the People's Republic of China and the State of Israel. And it's interesting that he mentions both of them because they actually go to prove my point. Let's look at Israel for a moment, which is a staunch ally of the United States. A major point of contention between the United States and Israel is this. Barack Hussein Obama could become president of the United States. Name me an Arab Israeli who could become a leader of one of the leading political parties in Israel and then become the prime minister in the Knesset. You can't, because if you're not a Jew, right, and that includes African Jews, there's all kind of racism against African Jews in Israel. It's documented. If you're not a European-derived Jew, you're not a legitimate citizen in Israel. That is a major roiling debate both here among American Jewry and the United States government, as well as in Israel itself. How can it become a real democracy, but it's going to be an ethno-snake? That brings us to China. Now, China never claimed to be a democracy. It's a communist state. We already know the track record with communism. As a matter of fact, Africa has a very bloody record with Leninist Marxism in the form of the Soviet Union. In Africa, it's not pretty. Once again, China is one of the most racist governments on the planet as we speak. What are they doing to their Uyghur citizens who are Muslim? They lock them up. They put them in essentially concentration camps. Okay. And do you think that a Uyghur could lead the Politburo in China? To ask the question is to answer it. If you ain't a Han Chinese, you ain't Chinese. Both of those examples that Omawali used goes to my point and goes to the point that John F. Kennedy made in 1963 before his death in Berlin, when he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I am a Berliner. That is to say, I am a citizen of the West. I am a citizen of democracy. I'm a citizen where we recognize human rights, where we protect the rights of the minority, and we don't hold where you came from against you. In Israel, they hold it where it come from, if you ain't a Jew. In China, they hold it against you if you ain't a Han Chinese. But in the United States, you can be whatever you want to be. Even president of the United States, even somebody that's very name bears, her very name is on the marquee, the Oprah Winfrey Network. That's my point.
Can I because he responded to your I guess your debate question or whatever. So
yeah, you can respond and then we'll move on to the next question. Also, real quick, for those of you who are on, please get the likes up. I need at least 50 likes. Please get the likes up if you're on. Tag anybody on this discussion who you think may find it interesting. And And thank you, Jay Sahara, for the $5 super chat. I see we'll never fully prosper under a government we have always been a threat to. And with that, Omwali Africa.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that question. So the question that was on the flyer is, can Black people prosper as Americans? And if you listen to a lot of the responses that Brother Obsidian gave, he gave all individual examples, right? Because you can only point to individual examples, right? Yeah, it's possible for us to for individuals within this particular nation state to have a measure of individual success and or prosperity, but it is not possible for Black people as a collective to do so, right? The nation at its core and all of its institutions are inherently, I think Brother Obsidian has to mute, I'm getting a playback from him, but all of its institutions are inherently anti-Black. In fact, much of the United States policy is chiefly concerned with either the removal or the reduction of its Black population. That's one of the reasons why Black men, by and large, are socialized, right, to accept our own removal, and Black women are socialized to see us as useless and or obsolete. I would argue that Black men in this country are the most superfluous population that we have. In fact, if you go back to 1969, there was a book published by an economist by the name of Sidney Wilhelm, and he asked a very simple question: who needs the Negro? And the argument was that Black men were brought to this country as a labor input, but as our labor became obsolete, right, to this country's economic productivity, the question becomes, what do you do with this obsolete population? And the answer has always been warehouse it, kill it, do whatever you need to do to essentially get rid of it. So can we prosper as Americans? No. I mean, you wouldn't have an ADOS movement if that was the case, right? The leaders of that movement are making it clear that Black people either need to be given some type of reparations, i.e. being made white economically, in order to even survive as so-called Americans, right? So 150 years post-emancipation, Black people in this country are still fighting to full access to citizenship rights, right? Because we are not American. In fact, America could not even exist without the Black success, the individual success that he's pointing to. So that's so the so-called tokens are in place to give cover to the fact of what America is doing to its Black population, right? That also helps to alleviate some of the pressure, because if Black people believe, like Obsidian believes, that this so-called American dream is possible, they can look at the Jays, they can look at the Oprahs, they can look at the Obamas and say, hey, that can be me too, then Black people won't revolt. And that was the issue that their studies found in the 60s, that Black people were revolting and they were rebelling because they were discontent. But if you give Black people the illusion that they have been included, then you can maintain them in a stagnant position. I mean, he made the fact that he said nothing in this country is permanent, but race is always permanent. You can't transcend race because it's a racial caste and it's a racialized system. So, I mean, again, he's making some very interesting points. I just don't think they hold up to his facts.
Okay.
Well,
okay. On to the next question.